Hello, my name is Ortloff, and I'm here today to present to you work I did together with my co-authors about analyzing the influence of researcher experience and data type during qualitative analysis of an interview and survey study on security advice. We are researchers from the field of usable security and privacy, and in our qualitative studies, we have simple as well as complex data to code, for example, short answers in surveys or full interviews. In our field, it's common practice to use two coders for any kind of qualitative analysis, and in our experience, reviewers request two coders. However, for the simple data, the benefit did not seem clear to us. So we set out to explore empirically how many coders we need in qualitative analysis. We were interested in three specific research questions. 1. How do coding results differ for simple versus complex data? And we explore this both between groups of coders and within groups of coders. For our second research question, we compared students and researchers to find out how coding results differ for researcher experience. And for our third research question, we were interested in the reviewer's perspective. For this talk, I'm going to focus on research question 1 and 3. If you're interested in research question 2, please read our paper for more details. We wanted to check whether our experience matched reviewers' actual preferences. And to do this, we contacted SUP's PC members from the past 5 years. They're experienced reviewers in the domain of usable security and privacy, and we were able to recruit 37 of them. We asked them their opinion about several different scenarios regarding coding practices, and they should select all of those which they thought were acceptable. And we found that in general there was more acceptance of scenarios including two coders and no difference between complex and simple data. However, for all scenarios which we presented, there were some reviewers who thought they were acceptable and others who thought they didn't. And in free text answers, our participants explained that they also accept non-preferable research practices as long as the authors argue convincingly why they chose to do this. So, based on the survey, we recommend that you describe your method thoroughly and explain and justify important methodological decisions, regardless of how many coders you choose to use. Let's now get down to our main question. To analyze the analysis process, you first have to analyze some data. So we collected simple data from a survey about types of security advice where participants used free text fields to enter security advice. And for complex data, we conducted interviews about reasons for trusting security advice and participants' perceptions of realism and effectiveness of such advice. And these studies were based on previous work by Jon et al. And Busse et al., both published at SUPS. We then had 7 researchers and 65 students analyze these data, either the survey or the interview data, and they produced several analysis outcomes, codebooks, coding of the actual data, and those who analyzed the interviews also produced mind maps. And this was our content analysis phase. In our meta-analysis, we then analyzed the analysis outcomes of the participants. So let's dive into the comparison between simple and complex data for our first research question. In general, we found that complex data leads to more variation than simple data. In this graph, you can see the top 10 most frequent concepts which appeared in final outcomes and the percentage of groups in which they appeared. On the left, for the complex data, it's pretty clear that the amounts of groups which identified a given concept declines pretty rapidly compared to simple data on the right, where the top 10 concepts appeared in most of the group's final outcomes. So there's more variation in the complex data, and different researchers identified different concepts for the complex data, while in the simple data, the researchers identified similar concepts. This came from a comparison between different groups of researchers, so now let's look at comparing within groups. Within groups, we found that individual coders had different contributions to their group's outcome. So let's break this down. On the top of this graph, you can see the number of concepts identified by each group. On the left, the students, and on the right, the researchers. And as you can see, for the students group, for most of the students groups, they identified somewhat less concepts. In the bottom of the graph, you can see the origin of the concept. So which coder contributed a concept to the final outcome. And to get this data, we compared the individual codebooks from when coders worked alone to the final outcomes which they produced together. In orange, you can see those concepts which appeared in multiple coders, individual codebooks, and also in the final outcome. Then in black and blue respectively, you can see concepts which appeared only in one of the coders, individual codebooks from when they worked alone, and then in the final outcome, so only one of the coders found this concept. And finally, in pink, you can see concepts which did not appear in any individual codebook. So only after the coders had started collaborating, this code appeared and was identified. So basically, if coders had been working alone, the final outcome would contain only about half of the concepts identified compared to the actual outcome from our study where coders worked together. Of course, this depends on which coder's codebook we would be looking at. So, from all this data from our study, how many coders do we need in qualitative analysis? Well, it depends. But don't worry, I won't leave you hanging like that, because we do have some recommendations to clarify this a bit. Based on our exploration of research question 2, as you could see in the graphs I showed you, there were some differences in the number of concepts identified between the more experienced researchers and the students. And content-wise, we also found differences between researchers and students regarding the degree of abstractness. Interestingly, we also found differences between groups of researchers from different institutions who also had different epistemological backgrounds. But since our researcher sample was not very large, these findings are tentative, and further research is definitely necessary to pin this down. In the meantime, we recommend to clarify the expertise level of the analyzing researchers and describe their expertise about the topic and the analysis method when describing your qualitative study. So comparisons between different studies, including different researchers, are possible. Regarding research question 1, in our study, interactions between coders led to identifying new concepts in the data. So when coding with multiple researchers, you should make the most of getting different perspectives. And when coding with multiple researchers, discussion and interaction between coders are a vital part of the analysis process and should definitely be encouraged. For complex, open-ended data and research questions, we see a clear benefit of having two coders who interact with each other, so we recommend using multiple coders. However, for simple, well-defined data and research questions, especially when a codebook has already been established collaboratively, a single coder may be sufficient. So, to answer the question we started with, based on our study, we see a clear benefit of using multiple coders interacting with each other when analyzing complex data. But for simple, well-defined data and research questions, a single coder may be enough. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have, and if you're interested, you can also drop me an email at ortloff@cs.uni-bonn.de or have a look at my website. Thank you.